Hello and welcome to the UCL ChangeMakers Understanding Communication and Language podcast. My name is Mark Campion and I'm a first year Speech and Language Sciences student at UCL. This podcast is about everyday things that amazing speech and language therapists do, and we're talking about organising ourselves, juggling priorities, dealing with difficult situations, and generally working around those times when our best laid plans come to nothing. How do our experts navigate their way through these challenges and stay upbeat in the process? Joining me is Anna Sauerbats.
Hello.
Quillon Lyons.
Hello.
And Sam Walls.
Hello.
Anna, where are you based and who are you working with at the moment?
Well, Mark, I am a speech and language therapist working for an NHS trust in London. And as part of that job, I work across mainstream primary schools as well as a specialist speech and language resourced school. And I lead on our team's developmental language disorder provision. And then 2 days a week, I also work at UCL teaching our lovely MSc students.
Represent. Thank you very much. And Quillon, how about yourself?
I work at a hospital in London. I'm currently covering, it's a rotational post. I'm currently covering the respiratory wards, intensive care, surgical wards.
So you're working currently, is it mainly with adults? Is it mainly with children? Or?
Yeah, with adults.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. It sounds really interesting and very varied from Anna as well. And Sam, how about yourself?
So I work at Blossom House School, which is an SEN school, and I work primarily within upper phase, so that's year 9 to 11.
Oh, amazing. Thank you. So we've got a huge variation of different service users across different services. So thank you, first of all, for all being here. We are here at UCL Arena, which isn't far from UCLH, which is why you might hear ambulances flying past. So I do apologise in advance, but there's not much we can do about that. So we're going to get into our first topic. I'm going to start this one, Sam, with you. So sorry to pick you out. But
it's all right.
So the first question is around how amazing it is to be a speech and language therapist and talk about everyday things that make it great. And we'd love to hear about your setting and the speech and language therapy that you do on a day-to-day basis. What do you like most about your job in your setting?
So there's lots of things to love about working in the area that I do, but one of the things that I really appreciate is the big variety of things that I'm able to do. So I run 6 group therapy sessions a week, and then I also have a series of one-to-ones, and those are targeting a variety of different things, so social communication or emotional regulation, or I've got one speech one-to-one. So being able to do a lot of different things is really enjoyable, makes the days go quickly, but also I'm kind of keeping my toes in all the toes in the water, fingers in the pies.
Toes in the pies.
Toes in the pies. In the watery pies.
Great. So I suppose it's that variation from day to day, that it's not the same thing going in, doing, a 9 to 5, 8 to 4, whatever, and then leaving. It's that, this week I'm doing groups. And so how much of your week is sort of between groups and between individual sessions?
So it's probably about 50-50.
Nice.
I would say, yeah.
Okay. And is there any session in particular with either an individual or a group that you can clearly remember that made you walk out and go, this is the career that I'm really happy that I chose?
Yes. So my speech one-to-one, he has historically had difficulty engaging with activities or going at all. So after he's in one of my group sessions as well, and I think after a lot of rapport building and getting to know them, he started to come to these sessions once a week. And after maybe the third one in a row where he'd come and he'd engaged and he'd taken part in everything, I was like, finally, tangible progress.
And I suppose for yourself and looking at outcome measures, you've got that element, but also at sort of the level of him, did he realise as well, was he seeing value in that, and going from group to then individual, could you see that like a change in him?
Definitely, yeah. I'm not sure if it's that he was just enjoying the sessions and decided to carry on, but he would ask if we'd be doing it next week. So it was
anticipating, waiting for it to happen again. I think that's a great sort of sign that he was really looking forward to. That's great. Thank you very much. Did you always want to be a speech and language therapist?
No, I fell into it by accident.
Okay.
I joined a teaching assistant agency, and they asked, how would you feel working in an SEN school setting? And I said, no, absolutely not.
Okay.
I've not worked in any school. Don't do that to me. And so on my second day, I was in an SEN school. And it turns out I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And I kind of worked from, I was a TA there, and then I was an SLTA. And then I kind of came to the crossroads. It was like, would you like to become a SEN teacher? And then the speech and language team told me about the postgrad course. And actually, when I had to cover teaching a class because the teacher was on maternity leave, I realised that I hated that. So I was very excited to do speech and language therapy. And so I applied for the course, and here I am.
And a graduate of UCL.
That's right.
Yeah, there we go. Once again, represent the UCL. Thank you very much. That's great to hear. And great to hear that it seems that you went from that sort of teaching assistant then to SLTA and then made the full commitment to it. And it's great to hear. So thank you very much. Quillan, I'll come to you next, if that's okay. So I'll go with the same question. What do you like most about your job?
The thing I always say about my job is two of my favourite things in life are chatting and eating. So working in the hospital setting, working with adults with acquired communication and swallowing disorders, those are two hugely important things in our lives, right? I mean, one, we're communicating right now. How do you form links or connections with other people is by communication. You know, it's part of what is inherently makes us human. Similarly, like any kind of celebration, think of it like a funeral, a wedding, a birthday. What do? We have food. We form connections. We communicate. We share time together over food and drink. It's obviously part of what we are as a living thing, but it's also part of what we are as a thing that almost has whether you want to call it a soul or a humanity. But it's really important part of who we are. So to be able to help people with that, when the thing that you take for granted in life that has happened, almost every day in your life, eating and communicating in some way, when those get affected and when those get taken away, to be able to contribute to helping someone with the problem with that it's a real privilege, to be honest.
That's an amazing answer. Yeah. Thank you, Colin. And I suppose just to add to that, I think that I know we didn't touch on any dysphagia in the previous question, but something that adds to that is something that, especially in London, hugely multicultural, something that transcends every single culture and is eating. And I think that's a huge sort of consideration. And I can really see how that makes a difference across the service as well. Yeah,
and I think that's something that diversity within the profession can help with, because there's countless number of different cultures in London, and we can't be an expert in all of them. But the best we can do, we can hope to learn as much as we can and have as much representation as we can as well. Yeah. Because we treat everyone. So to have a bit more knowledge of those different cultures and how they might differ in their beliefs towards, for example, communication or eating and drinking can really help.
And do you find within your setting you're spending more time with eating and drinking, with communication, or is it even split? Or
eating and drinking, dysphagia, absolutely. I think in the different settings I've worked in, since qualifying, in the neuro setting, so hyperacute stroke, acute stroke, and stroke rehab at various different levels, I'd say it's about probably 60-40 dysphagia to communication in those settings. In the acute medical wards, A&E, short stay unit, critical care, respiratory wards, all those other ones, bar neuro, is 90% dysphagia, if not more. Little bit of things like in the non-acute neuro wards, most of the communication I'd be involved with would be helping to help facilitate capacity assessments with people with cognitive problems, for example, or has a communication problem unrelated to the reason for admission. For example, we might get someone on a acute medical ward who's had a fall but also has a history of aphasia, or someone who has an exacerbation of their Parkinson's, someone with a new diagnosis of motor neuron disease, myasthenia gravis, something like that might affect their communication. Yeah, so predominantly dysphagia.
It sounds massively varied as well. Again, I suppose that again, going on sort of something that Sam said about coming in and seeing something different every single day, that probably has especially in the hospital setting where things have to move really quickly, I imagine that's something that you get used to, is seeing something just every day being different. And in light of that, is there a session that you can clearly remember that actually made you realise this is why I love SLT, and you know, you walked out of the hospital that day sort of 10 feet tall?
In a good way, there isn't one that stands out.
Yeah.
And that's because it happens regularly.
Oh, that's great to hear.
I think I can tell you a recent one
Yeah.
where we had a patient who had come in and with various medical conditions, had a really long stay on intensive care. He had lots of swallowing problems throughout his admission on intensive care, and then coming off intensive care. And we had a lot of involvement with him, doing various assessment and therapy. So, and then it came to a point where he needed to go home, and he continued with his dysphagia therapy at home. This guy really wanted to have a T-bone steak.
Okay.
And he really wanted to he loved cake as well.
Yeah.
And I don't live far from the hospital.
Okay.
And this was a great coincidence. I was in a pub near the hospital, and there was a party at the back of the pub.
Yeah.
And I looked in, and I saw this gentleman a few weeks after he'd been discharged eating his birthday cake.
Oh,
and that was a few weeks ago. And
Yeah.
that was a nice little moment.
Yeah.
Because he had been very diligent with his exercises.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's an amazing example as well of the input that you'd sort of provided and what you'd done to get him to that point where he could be, number one, in the pub, and then eating and drinking enough to feel strong and healthy enough to do that, but also to have the capacity to eat the cake. Yeah,
hopefully he had a T-bone steak earlier as well. But
yeah.
I assume you ran in and thickened the pint.
Absolutely not. Definitely not.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. And also, Colin, you touched on sort of after graduation, is it from Manchester?
Yeah, so I retrained in Manchester. I came to speech therapy a little bit late, like a lot of people do. I previously did a degree in anatomy back home in Ireland, and which actually helped quite a bit in many ways. Both in my degree and in day-to-day life as a speech therapist. But yeah, I did the undergrad up in Manchester Met. Finished there in 2016, so I've been working ever since. So it's 7 years ago. Had a really good experience with it, actually. Good course.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for sharing, Colin. And I really appreciate what you're saying. That's really nice, that example you gave to share as well. So thank you. It's also made me want some cake. So. And Anna, what do you like most about your job in your setting?
Well, I definitely agree with the previous points about the variety. Yeah. So because I work both in a specialist setting and a mainstream primary, I get to do so many varied things, and it's always keeps my job interesting. But I think that is one of the things I love most about this job, and I think most speech language therapists would agree that it is never boring. You know, there might be times when it's stressful and it's a lot and it's challenging, but honestly, I don't think I've ever been bored on a day in work in my life. There's always so much to learn, so many new therapy approaches to find out about, new evidence to read about, but also, even more importantly, just new families to work with and new children and new people to find out about, and they'll teach you so much as well. So I think that's what I really love most about my job, that I'm always on a process of learning. You know, my learning didn't stop as a speech language therapist when I graduated. It's ongoing and will always be ongoing. So, and then I think there's also the opportunities to be creative and innovate in our jobs. I think is something I really, really value. And whenever I, get a good idea for a new therapy activity that I think will work, doesn't always, but I'm sure we'll get onto that. It's really nice to be able to use creativity in my role.
Oh, that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing that as well. And I think it sounds that's been quite consistent through everyone that's sort of answered that question of the variety of going every single day into a different, either the same environment with different people or different environment, different approaches. And that's really something that's quite unique to speech and language therapy.
Yeah, I think so. And
I suppose in a sort of like in a work landscape, it can't be something where you can see something, do something, see someone do an approach and think, oh no, you can go, that's interesting actually. What are they doing? Look at the research and go, oh, let's try that. And everyone's got their own ways of finding things. So thank you very much for sharing. Is there a session with a client you can clearly remember that made you realise why you love your job?
Well, there's definitely one that really sticks in my mind. And funnily enough, it wasn't actually a session. It was a young person's annual review meeting. So for their education and healthcare plan, which, you know, sometimes can be dull, dry affairs. But this one, we'd been working a lot on the students' understanding of their own speech and language needs. So as a student with DLD, developmental language disorder, and we've been really working on them understanding what DLD was and how to advocate for themselves. And so this was the annual review just before they transitioned to secondary school. And there was a member of staff from the secondary school that came to the meeting. And without prompting, completely spontaneously, the student said to this member of staff at the start of the meeting, "Just so you know, I have DLD, so you might need to explain some things." We're all just floored. And then midway through the session, she did actually speak up and say, "Oh, you know, what does that word mean?" When the member of staff had said something she hadn't understood. And that was really just, you know, had such a huge impact. I felt so proud of this student for doing that. And it really kind of brought home that, you know, it's a privilege to sort of be involved with these young people's lives and help them with their communication. But really your goal is to make yourself redundant. And, you know, she was going off to secondary school and I wouldn't be working with them anymore. But it was, really great to have been a part of that.
Oh, that's an amazing story about the just sort of self-advocating and saying, like, I think we recently had a lecture on stammering, and there was something quite similar about sort of self-advertising at the beginning of an interview or a social interaction, just to let you know I may stammer. And actually that really helped with conversations, relationships and situations that people having communication difficulties might be in. So it's amazing for you, I suppose, to see that individual just doing that and being sort of standing back almost proud, like that I'm fine, really happy with that.
Definitely. And the more and more people do that, the more the public will understand and accept communication differences. So, you know, we really we need our people that we work with to be taking the lead in these matters, because it can make a huge difference to the world.
Yeah, and it's not something, I suppose, that individual's then going to carry and constantly think about, in the back of their mind thinking, I don't know what that word means, this person's speaking too fast. And actually they've just come out and said, I'm really, just to let you know I've got DLD, and then it makes people a bit more aware and normalises it, I think, a little bit more, especially in sort of the educational settings. So thank you very much, Anna. And Anna, you're a graduate of UCL as well?
I am as well, yes.
Represent.
Going back to the fold.
So Quillan, I'm sorry if you feel outnumbered here, so I do apologise, but it's great to have you here.
Happy to be here.
And Anna, did you always want to be a speech and language therapist?
No, I didn't. I'd never really heard of it until, some years after my first degree. So I first studied English for my undergraduate degree. Okay. So kind of came at it from an interest in language and linguistics and how language works in that way. And then I was living in Canada and ended up volunteering for a place called the Aphasia Institute, which is a really fantastic centre that helps, or it's sort of like a social base and also therapy base for adults with aphasia. And I just loved it. I really enjoyed my time there. And so while I was there, I applied for the course at UCL and then, came back to study. So it was kind of something I can't even remember how I first heard about it. I think somebody just mentioned it or suggested it, and I looked it up and thought, well, I like language. I like working with people. Don't know what I'm going to do with my English degree. So
thanks. I mean, I think that's quite a few people I've spoken to that have said quite similar things, that they just sort of stumbled across it and went, hang on a minute. And obviously amazing profession, and hearing those stories of all three of you, it is great to be here sat with you and listening to, and I hope to hear more of these stories. So we're going to move now to a different topic. This topic is, seeing as, we just finished our first year, we've spoken to quite a lot of other students. There's some shared challenges throughout that sort of students when we're talking, and we've done some research and everyone's sort of saying similar things. And I suppose we wanted to ask the question of, what do you find challenging in your role and how do you try to address the challenges? Because we've spoken, I suppose, at the beginning about the amazing things that, make you really proud of doing what you do every day. But obviously acknowledging that there are challenges along the way. So I guess I'll go with Quillan, I'll go with you first, if that's okay, just to change up the order. So can you tell us about a time where a session didn't go to plan, and any lessons or tips learned from that experience?
I can think of a few.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah, thanks.
What I wouldn't recommend is, it was my first day literally my first day as a speech and language therapist. And I was doing a bit of dysarthria therapy with someone.
Okay.
It was about 11:30 in the morning. And we finished our session. And then I said, oh, I better go. It's almost lunchtime. And this poor gentleman was nil by mouth with an NG tube in. So I couldn't eat. So you only make that mistake once.
Yeah.
But at least it was my first day, you know. I mean, in terms of things going wrong in a session in the acute hospital environment, there is a lot that can go wrong, or a lot that can disrupt a session, I should say, rather than necessarily go wrong. Sounds a bit worse than it is. Like in the acute environment, you can have, especially if you're in the stroke environment or hyperacute stroke environment, you can have your session interrupted by ward rounds, by doctors coming in to do really important and necessary investigations. Noise on the ward. You can have people become unwell. And there have been situations where I've had to, pull an emergency buzzer of a patient being particularly unwell. And I suppose those are those ones in terms of the acute hospital environment, having to call emergency, would be the biggest things that can go wrong, really, I suppose. But I think as you get more experienced and as you experience different situations, and you start to be able to roll with the punches a little bit more. Not literally too much. There have been occasions, but you start to be a bit more flexible and adaptable. And I think when things go wrong, you just need to remember as well, that's the nature of it. It's not your fault. Absolutely, planning helps. And I think the opportunity you have it as a student to plan your sessions to make the ideal session is really good, because there won't be many chances as a speech therapist to deliver that ideal session, that you've perfectly planned out. So being able to do that is good, because you know what to aim for. I'm trying to think of any other situations where things have gone wrong. It's
just one point you said about adaptability and flexibility. Could you explain what that looks like in reality? Because I think those two things are quite understood, and we learn to be adaptable and flexible as students in our placements when we work, but I feel like we work in quite protected environments because we're there as students. So I think there's safety nets. When you're the newly qualified professional, as you were just saying, what are the things that you've learned between that day and today that help in that adaptability and flexibility?
Yeah, I'll give a couple of examples if that's all right.
Yeah, thank you.
Sometimes, when you're in uni, you've got your ideas of what is the perfect assessment for a patient who's come in with a particular language problem, say following a stroke, or what the ideal thing you should do for a swallowing assessment is for a patient who's got one particular disorder. Then you arrive and say you want to do a communication assessment, and you have this idea of a particular published communication assessment you want to use, and someone else has it, or the hospital doesn't have it. How do you adapt in that situation? Or they might have one that's out of date. And to be honest, and I'm going back to the thing I mentioned about making things culturally appropriate as well, and you realize actually this assessment isn't culturally appropriate. How do you adapt that on the fly? And I think being aware of the resources you have can be really helpful, but there will always be times you need to change and make your assessment a bit dynamic and on the fly, and that comes with practice too. Another thing, say for example, we're talking about swallow assessment.
Okay.
That we all know that the gold standard in swallow assessment will be to do an instrumental assessment. Now, in lots of different hospitals, the number of assessments or the number of slots for assessment you have are nowhere near the amount you want to be able to do. So, for example, if you're working in a hospital that covers one borough and you might have 4 slots for video fluoroscopy, and that's for the whole borough and the hospital. And you have patients coming in and out of hospital with various swallow problems. They have I'll use the word again, dynamic ever-changing presentation across lots of different patients. How do you plan for that? How do we decide this patient is the one for this video fluoroscopy on this day, when we've only got one day to do it, we've only got this many slots? There's a lot of logistics involved for something like that. And those situations, it can feel, it's like a real problem solving, I think. Sometimes a lot of what we do, unfortunately, isn't necessarily wholly clinical. Yeah. It's like event planning almost at times, you know. It's logistics. It's like putting together a jigsaw, so we can see the clinical picture, you know. And that does take up time, and that comes with experience. And just something else that might be an example of being flexible or adaptable is, I've kind of touched on it here, but realizing that what you have in your head as the gold standard treatment or assessment or intervention practically can't always be delivered. And be thinking, how can I best use my time to give the best assessment or intervention or management or therapy that I can within the constraints of whether it be the public health system or if you're in a private situation, what's the best you can do in that situation, practically, logistically, pragmatically, and ethically. Yeah. What you want to do as the ideal is rarely available, to be completely honest.
Yeah, thank you for being honest, because it's appreciated as well, and it's great to hear. Thank you for sharing those amazing situations that it really does seem like a really dynamic environment that's probably changing from second to second, that having to sort the logistics of things like that out, especially with instrumental assessment.
As Anna said, you're never bored. Yeah. Absolutely not. You're always busy.
Oh, thank you, Colin. I've got one more question actually for you, Colin, if that's okay. And this question is, can you think of one particular time that you've solved a problem in an interesting way?
Yeah. Okay. So I remember a patient we had before. I'm going to say we because there was, as a lot of the time, there's multiple different members of the MDT involved. We had a patient who had aphasia, was deaf, and communicated using sign. So they'd had a left-sided middle cerebral artery stroke, left MCA, often associated with language disorder or aphasia post-stroke. This person used a type of sign language that uses both hands. So they were struggling to deliver, to communicate, because of both aphasia and weakness in their right hand, because they had quite a dense or severe right-sided weakness. So we had to do joint communication therapy with both occupational therapy and physiotherapy, because they had to learn to we were retraining, I suppose, both language and fine motor movement on the right side at the same time. And interestingly, maybe some of the people listening might probably be aware of this already because of the fine standard of teaching at UCL, obviously. But if someone has had a stroke and is trying to get certain words out and the wrong words come out, you can call that a paraphasia. So a semantic paraphasia might be the person wants to say bottle but says cup, so it's a word related. I'm saying that because there's a bottle in front of me. This person was fascinatingly producing semantic paraphasias with their hands. It's just another modality of language, you know. It's just not one we see as often on the stroke ward. Yeah. So that was real. In a way, it was quite a typical session in that what we were targeting was the same thing, but we were just approaching it in a different way. You wouldn't often need to use physiotherapy and occupational therapy in a language therapy session, for example.
Thank you, Colin. Really appreciate it. That's great to hear. And thank you for sharing those experiences. Sam, I'll come on to you next, if that's okay. So again, thinking about adaptability and flexibility, are there any things that you find challenging in your role? And how do you try to address these challenges? And can you tell us about a time when a session didn't go to plan and any lessons or tips learned from that experience?
Absolutely. So similarly, this is a story from my first week of working. So just finished the course, straight into the first job. And I've got a one-to-one with a student who, this is a different student who has previously sort of rejected speech and language therapy. But at Blossom House, there's a wonderful series of pupil profiles with their diagnoses, their needs, their motivators, things they don't like. So I studiously looked at that. I had my plan ready. I had my step ups and my step downs, as any good UCL student should. And I had seen on the motivators that this student liked Liverpool. Brilliant. Yeah. So my session, I was going to go in, introduce myself, we'd get to know each other, we'd build some rapport, a bit of informal assessment. It was a wonderful session, and I was very proud of it. And I walked into the room, and we sat down, and I introduced myself, and I said, so I heard Liverpool won last week. And he stood up, threw the chair, and left the room. And I learnt later that he's become aware that people try and use Liverpool as a rapport building exercise. So I checked my step downs, none of them were applicable. And so, being both adaptable and flexible, I decided to pivot the session. And I think it can be important. So in the setting I work in, there's a wide variety of need and levels of support. And so if our one-to-one session just became about helping this student regulate his emotions and sort of bring it back to a calm level, then that's fine. It doesn't matter that I didn't achieve any of the things I initially intended to, as long as it's been beneficial for the student. And I tried to pivot it into a bit of a practical zones of regulation session, which is about identifying what emotion you're feeling and what you can do to help yourself leave the red, yellow or blue zone and go into the green zone.
Oh, amazing. That sounds so... Just to touch on that, is that pivoting is just changing from sort of the intention of the session into something else that you still...
Exactly
just
right.
Yeah, that was just to make sure. That sounds really great. Thank you, Sam. And can you think of one particular time that you've solved a problem in an interesting way?
In that session, we went outside, and it became a very practical session. We went out to the playground, to the football pitch, and tried to use football and the way we were kicking the ball as an analogy for the different ways we were feeling.
That sounds great.
Cool.
That sounds really useful as well, and sort of practical for them. So thank you very much for sharing. That sounds really good. Anna, so if you wouldn't mind telling us about a time when a session didn't go to plan and any lessons or tips learnt from that experience.
Sure. Well, unlike my colleagues, this example isn't from when I just started practicing, but it's actually from just a few weeks ago. So just to reassure you that mistakes will always happen and sessions will mostly go to plan, but they'll still keep going wrong, at least for me anyway. Hopefully I'm not alone in that. So yeah, it was quite recently, and this is a child I've been working with for quite a long time. It's quite a complex profile of speech and language difficulties, and I'd planned what I thought was going to be a really great activity. It incorporated Fortnite, it incorporated Pokemon. It was going to simultaneously target goals of pronouns and auxiliary use. It had an elaborate scoring system, which did mean I was going to have to update it every week, but I thought it's okay, this will be fine. And then we started the session, and I'd chosen apparently the wrong Fortnite and Pokemon characters, and the child was very cross with me. And he came up with perfectly good sentences to illustrate the pictures I'd chosen, but they weren't the sentences that incorporated the goals I was working on. So for me, they weren't good enough. So he got even more cross, and we ended up having to sort of throw that idea out the window and just come back next time. But I think the lesson that I would share from this, and which I'm learning every year of my practice continually, is that, well, one, you can plan and you can get all your organisation in ready, but it doesn't always go to plan, and you can't always predict that. If you line up everything, sometimes things will just go wrong. And then I think another lesson was just that actually sometimes getting too carried away with the activities can really be a bad idea, and actually sometimes simple and repetitive is better. And it's really the techniques and the facilitation that you bring to the therapy session and your skills as a therapist in that that makes the difference, both in terms of making it motivating and effective in therapy. So, this child didn't need every complicated picture to be exactly about his interests. Actually, he needed something that he could succeed in. And by changing the activity to something that was far more simple and repetitive, he wasn't bored by it because our interactions made it interesting for him, and it was much more effective. So yeah, that was a very recent one where I relearnt the lessons I've learnt many times over.
Thank you for sharing that. And I guess that's a difficult sort of thing about the constant changing landscape of what children are interested in, and having to stay clued up with how many Pokemon there are and what programs or games are being played.
Oh, absolutely. I know none of the YouTubers, and it's a constant source of hilarity for the children I work with.
Oh,
the risk of going for it and getting it wrong is too terrifying.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I need to be 100% confident that my reference is rock solid. Otherwise, I'm not making it.
Although actually, I do find that you being ignorant about something they're really knowledgeable about can be a really powerful and effective tool. They can then teach you about something. They can be the expert in the room for that, and that has a lot of distance in that. I use that a lot. My ignorance.
Is that something that's come up then, Sam, from experience, where you've just gone for it and gone, hey, did you see this upload? And it's
fortunately, I'm very cool, and I think Fortnite is something that just the concept seems to elude me, and whatever reference I make to it is incorrect, even though I've fully done my research.
Yeah.
I think one thing to add, that I've certainly got carried away with activities myself in the planning of them. They've become sort of more elaborate and nebulous as I've gone, yes, this and this, and they like this, so I can add this on. And actually, it's kind of got too far away from the point of what the activity was about anyway.
Yeah, so almost a similar point of just actually going, why are we here?
Yeah.
Let's get this done, and then use that as either a reward or something else, rather than use that as the main motivator in the actual activity. That's great to hear. Thank you. Okay, Anna, I'm going to start with you on this one. The next topic we're going to speak about is building and maintaining professional relationships, as it's part of what we do every day. But it's a lot easier said than done. I think the people in this room, you've got amazing experiences with different groups of people and the people that surround those and that care for them, whether that be in a hospital, in an adult setting, or in a sort of pediatric setting. Now, what would the top things not to say to a service user, family member, or member of the MDT?
Oh, gosh.
I'm sorry if I thrown you in on that one.
That's okay. Top things not to say.
Not to say.
Not to say.
Well, not that any of you would ever say this, but I'm the expert. Don't say that. I can cure you. That would be something I would recommend never saying.
You're doing it so wrong.
Yeah, you're doing it so wrong. That was a no-no. And I'm a speech therapist. I work on lisps. I'm probably a caution against saying that. I don't know really. I think I can probably more easily recommend things that will do to help a working relationship. I've never...
That was going to be my next question.
I know, sabotage one. I don't know if, my colleagues have any ideas.
Is there anything, before we get on to, I'm sure that you've got the amazing things to say. I just thought I'd throw you off a little bit with that one to begin with. Is there anything that you've said, and this is open to the room, anything you've said and then regretted? Colin, I know you said about enjoy your lunch and someone was nil by mouth. And I guess when you're working, as you've all said, in these really fast moving, busy environments, there's some of the things that you might just say and not really think about. And then when you actually think,
Yeah, I think, as Anna said there, we'd love to give people definite answers sometimes, like I can fix this, or give a specific concrete time for something. And I'd love to be able to do that and say, we're definitely going to do this video fluoroscopy tomorrow at 11 a.m. or we're definitely going to see your relative every day for communication therapy. But we can't promise that, not in the current environment. And that can be hard to explain to people, because we do need to be honest as well about what we can provide. When, we always really need to remember this isn't just another patient. This is someone's relative. This is a person who is having probably the worst thing in their life happen to them. And we need to do everything we can, but within the constraints of of our resources. It can be really challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Will this get better? you can't give a definite answer.
And Sam, would you have anything to add there about anything not to say to a service user, or anything that you've said and then thought, oh, should I have said that? Just, I suppose that those kind of things you can just say and then rescind, say, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to say that, or...
Absolutely, and I'm sure I've just repressed all of memories of doing that. But something I've definitely been guilty of on placements is using speech and language jargon with service users or their family, probably in a misguided attempt to explain to them what's going on and to put them at ease that I know what I'm talking about. But actually, it can be irritating, confusing, and it doesn't make it an enjoyable experience.
I have a nice example of that actually that I saw happen on a ward once. Hospital I was working in, the term that they use on the ward for someone who was ready to leave hospital, healthy enough to leave hospital and move to either rehab or nursing home or wherever they were going to go next, was medically optimized awaiting transfer, MOAT. So they used the acronym MOAT. And this patient's relative came up and asked one of the nursing staff a question about her dad and what was going to happen, and the person said, the member of nursing staff said, "Oh yeah, he's query MOAT." What does that mean? You know, query is often used in the NHS as this might be the case, and then MOAT, like, obviously that person was under, you know, if you had asked them to step back and think, what are you actually saying to this person? It doesn't make any sense. They wouldn't have said it. But there's so much jargon, as Sam says, that we get used to and that becomes second nature for us.
Exactly.
But to the person who's in front of us or their relative, or they'll never have heard it before. It's a whole new language almost.
Yeah, and I guess that's difficult from the sort of, if you think about the family member has come into that medical environment, so whoever's working there, everything has to be incredibly detailed, and that probably what builds these acronyms is because you're having to communicate 3 sentences worth of information in one. So to be able to shorten everything down and get across that information as quickly as you can, then the actions can start happening, because it sounds like time's one of the massive pressures there, especially with discharging and getting sort of people out if they're healthy enough.
And like I was saying before, if for us it's our day-to-day being in hospital, and we get used to it. I remember first time placements being really nervous about it, but you do get used to it.
Yeah.
This relative or patient, this might be the first time ever in a hospital since they were born, you know. Like, I've had patients who haven't been in hospital in 40 years. I've had family members who had never had to visit someone in hospital before. And that can be incredibly stressful. Or similarly, if you're, you know, a parent worrying about your child's language development, it's going to be so personal and emotive for you. We have to remember that for that person. Remember that when we're dealing with that and that person as well, because this is our day-to-day, but this is their entire world sometimes. Yeah,
and that's a great point, because you might see 20 people that day that have had a stroke, but, you know, for that family, this is their family member that's had a stroke, and it's really difficult because you're being professional and working through it all, but, you know, it all does carry emotion and feeling. Has there ever been an acronym that you've just had to say, I don't know what this is? Is this a misspelling, or has anything funny ever arisen from that?
I think I see an acronym every day that I don't understand, to be honest.
I mean,
you just build them up over time.
I'm sure when I started on my acute placement, and you look at some of the clinical notes, and it's just nothing. It's just, there's no actual words there. It's just capital letters, question mark at the front of the sentence. This is nothing. This is everything I know that sentences shouldn't be.
So can't make a tree with that.
Yeah. I guess that's it. And I guess it's the case of just in those first sort of thinking about the listeners of this podcast and the students, that not to be afraid to just say, what does that mean?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because I suppose a lot of the time it's better to ask and understand. And actually it might be something that is just a misspelling or a mistype, or it might be something that actually you're going to start to use every day and realize, I can save myself 25 characters by just writing these 3. So, and
the person you're asking might not know either. And then you can both learn.
Exactly.
And not be glad you asked.
Yeah, I suppose it's just that dropping that sort of, especially in like a really high profile medical environment, and you're a professional, you deserve to be there as well as everyone else, but being like, hang on a minute, I don't know what this means. So,
and it's not malicious gatekeeping, it's just the common usage. It's just
yeah. Oh, amazing. Oh, thank you for that. So we've thought about the great things to say, the not so great things to say to service users and family members. What about the great things? What are the kind of things that you're sort of give as a top tip when speaking to other professionals, service users, family members?
Oh, I think really just trying to build those connections on a personal level is so important and really can't be underestimated, and it's really worth putting the time in for that. So because I work for the NHS but within schools, I'm coming into schools as a sort of an outsider. So I think it's can feel more difficult to build those working relationships when you're only there once a week, and maybe the school staff will know each other and they have their sort of, team bonding things, and you're sort of coming in, but really the success of your job is dependent on having those good working relationships with the school staff. So I think one tip for that, which a previous manager shared, and I've always remembered it, is to have your lunch in the staff room. Sounds very simple, but it's really important that you don't just go outside or squirrel away in a little broom cupboard that you can find to have your sandwich. Be brave, go into the staff room and start to chat with people. Because even if you're just chatting about what you're doing at the weekend or, what was on TV last night, those seemingly inconsequential conversations will actually make the other ones so much easier when you need to talk to them about a particular child or about incorporating a technique into their teaching. It's so much easier and more effective if you have a good working relationship with them as people. So I think that would definitely be one of my tips for anybody that's working in schools.
Thank you, Anna. It's really good advice, I think, as well, because there's that element, I suppose, where, like as you said, the teachers are going through the training days, and in that setting, if you're just coming in and then going really hard to build that very quick sort of instantaneous rapport and friendship and sort of working relationship. Any tips or advice to help building rapport with the service users, so with the children in these schools? Is there anything you can find apart from the Fortnite and the Pokemon research? Is there any other advice that you'd give?
I think really listening to them and respecting what they say and actually taking it into account, and not just it's time to set your therapy goals, let's get out a talking mat, although that is very important, but actually in each session you see them listening to how they're responding to something. Are they really bored with this thing that you're doing? Do they see it as unimportant? And not seeing any of those behaviours as being problematic or challenging and just leaving it on the child, or like, well, they weren't being compliant today or they weren't engaging, but thinking, okay, well, they were telling me something there. They were telling me that what I've come up with doesn't feel important to them. It doesn't feel motivating to them. And that is really valuable, and I need to respect that and listen to them, to what they're telling me. And seemingly with parents, I think really just listening to them and talking to them. So when you meet them to do the case history, particularly when you're in Europe, of course you're going to have your questions that you're going to ask and go through, and that is important. But just making sure that you're taking the time to listen to their answers and following threads that come up. And allowing them to talk at length if they want to on what's concerning them or what they're proud of about their child.
Thank you. That's amazing advice. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And Kulon, how about you?
I want to pick up what Anna was saying at the beginning there about building good relationships with your colleagues, I think, and kind of extended members of the team or people you might not see every day. I think that's so important. I think those kind of connections that you can make and building up that relationship with other members of the team can have a really tangible impact in terms of the care the person or the patient can get, and also how quickly, if you know who you need to go to for something, because there's so many different professionals involved in people's care at any kind setting. So I can only be specific with regards to my own experience, but say, for example, I know a patient has there's some problems that look like ENT might be able to help out with, and I've seen something on maybe their video fluoroscopy that I want gastro to be involved with. Because I've built up good relations with them, I know where they are. I can email them, I can hunt them down, I can text them, and get that answer quickly. I think they sound like soft skills, and I don't mean the way I'm phrasing it, that sounds pejorative, but it's really important in terms of getting what's best for that person. Even knowing, in terms of the kind of being aware of the referral process, I think say, for example, if you're working in a hospital, you might need to refer to different boroughs. Knowing who the contact person is at different boroughs. If you think anytime one of the thing I've noticed anytime starting a new job, it's learning those logistical things and who the people are. That's often the hardest bit, and that makes you feel like you're not getting stuck in with the clinical side. Generally, you'll be pretty okay with the clinical side, but it's finding out all that logistical stuff, like where is this kept and what key opens this door, all those kind of things. So building good relationships helps make all of that stuff easier, I think.
And I think as well, just to add, that it's not just those sort of instant day-to-day, like where do I get this thing from? It's actually the longer term kind of vision for where you want to be going as well, that if you have those personal relationships, makes it so much more possible to do. Like within our service, the relationships that we have with like the paediatricians and the psychologists, even though many of us don't work sort of day to day with them, but knowing them and being able to sort of say hello and work with them means that we can talk more broadly about the long-term things. So like, diagnosing DLD and how paediatricians can work with us on that. It really greases the wheels of everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we're all people with worries and stresses and anxieties. We're not robots. So the more approachable we are, and the more approachable other people are, there have been situations where I've had to go and feedback something to a member of the MDT who might not have been the friendliest or the most approachable in the past, and it can make you feel less likely to want to go and do that. So trying to put yourself in the other way around, you want people to be able to come and approach you, and also knowing that you're the person they might want to speak to about a particular issue, or so they're aware of your presence, they're aware of your expertise, and also that they can feel comfortable approaching you, rather than thinking, oh no, they're a bit aloof or they're a bit awkward to get. And I think it's not a case of being overly chatty or anything like that. It's about being professional and approachable and positive. Being I think approachable is one of the key things.
And I think you're right. I think it's a two-way street as well. If you act more approachable, then they're more likely to be more approachable with you. And I think we have so many daily, weekly, monthly, annual stresses in this job. Yeah. And so there's acting in that way with your colleagues can really make all of the downtime in between these maybe moments of stress more manageable.
And realising they have the huge stresses as well.
Exactly.
Because we can certainly get, I know I can anyway, get very bogged down in thinking, the things that are stressing me out today. But any member of the MDT I meet will have their own version of that, whether it be the person who working in the kitchen who is getting pressure from above to get these meals to the patients on time, or the nurse who has, the way I always think of nurses is it's like you're waitering with 20 different tables, but if you get an order wrong, someone could get really unwell. They've have to keep so many different things in their mind at one time, and have so much that they're keep so many plates spinning at once. It's incredible what some of them do, and to that must be incredibly stressful. And likewise, doctors, we know they're overworked, they're underpaid. Being aware that what might be a huge issue for me from a speech and language therapy perspective is one part of that patient's overall picture, and they might have 20 things going on.
Well, thank you everyone for your contributions on that point. That's great to hear. Do you ever sort of, just to branch off of that, you were just saying about a nursing colleague, for example, do you ever find that sort of feedback you feel comfortable to share with those colleagues and just say, take a second to say to someone, I really can see what you're doing a great job? Do you feel like, not in a patronising way, of course, but I suppose that working in part of those relationships, do you feel comfortable to be able to make those sort of comments, especially if there's a positive working relationship?
If there's a positive working relationship, sure. I think what can be hard, and maybe this is something you've experienced, that I go into different hospitals, going to different schools, covering so many different wards. Yeah. You might get to know some of the, for example, OTs or physios or other speech therapists tend to have a bit more interaction, but I might go onto certain wards only once every couple of weeks. So you can't know everyone on the ward. You can't build up a really good relationship with everyone in that ward, in terms they know who you are, what you do, the intricacies of your job, the things that you think is good patient care. It's just being as accessible and approachable on the ward when you are there. And trying not to add to those members of staff stress by, really bluntly saying this patient haven't recommended this, trying to be a bit emotionally intelligent with it, I suppose, and empathetic when you're dealing with other members of the team.
I think that idea, Mark, though, about feeling confident to recognise and acknowledge the fantastic work that other MDT colleagues are doing is really important. Is something I'm sort of trying to resolve to do more with the teaching colleagues that I work with, because I think the role of the speech and language therapist in the school is often set up as if I am giving them advice, and often I am, or I'm making suggestions for how to, adapt to this child in the classroom. But actually, there's so much that I learn from the teachers as well, and I really need to openly acknowledge it more, I think, and say, like, that lesson that I just observed was fantastic. I loved how you incorporated X, Y, Z and used these visuals, and that was really interesting to see, because there's so much we can learn from them as well.
The trust I work in has set up a formal way of recognising when someone's done a great job, which is really nice. It's called a Greatix. You fill it out and you,
as opposed to Datix.
And the person gets a really nice certificate sent to them, and with what you said on it, recognising their good work. So if something like that a bit more formal could be done, is nice, as well as that more informal day to day.
I suppose as a working professional in that setting, if you were to come in one day and you received one, then sort of picks you up more than 2 cups of coffee would, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You can also highlight the good stuff that you're doing consistently.
Yeah.
That maybe because you do it every single day, you're not going to recognise. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just suppose going back to one point, Anna, you were saying about, I suppose if in that setting, if you're going in and into different places and not spending, maybe coming in once every few weeks, do you ever feel that any colleagues or caregivers don't understand why you're there? Does that ever happen? And I imagine that sort of under the idea of difficult conversations. How do you find that?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's often a lack of understanding or a misunderstanding of what the role of the speech and language therapist is, both from staff sometimes. I think less so where I work. That might just be because they're used to us always being around. But certainly I think maybe newer staff who maybe haven't worked alongside speech and language therapists much might have a bit of a misunderstanding. But certainly for families who have maybe not had much contact with speech and language therapy services beforehand, definitely I think there can be just a gap between how we work and maybe what their expectations of us are. And I think it's really important to just be quite open in explaining how you work right from the get-go, so not falling into the trap of assuming or just forgetting to mention it, but actually taking the time to say, okay, so I work in the school and I'm here one day a week, but that doesn't mean that I see every child one day a week. Each week I'll be more working with them when they need it and working with the school staff to ensure that their needs are met, and just being very explicit about that. But I think as well making the time not just at the point of referral, but to kind of hold regular sort of coffee mornings or drop-ins at the settings you work in to get to know the parents and the families outside of just the case history time is a really nice way to address that as well, and help them understand more about what speech and language therapy is and the range of children that we work with.
Thank you. And Sam, I suppose in your setting, how do you find that? Because I think you mentioned earlier there's quite a few speech and language therapists.
Yes, I'm fortunate to be a part of quite a large team of speech and language therapists. The head teacher of the school is a trained speech and language therapist, and I think recognises the benefit of having multiple speech and language therapists. So there's, for every single class, there's both a teacher attached and a speech and language therapist attached, which is really good from a sort of colleague point of view, because I'm sat in the office surrounded by other speech and language therapists, and it becomes a very nice collaborative sort of atmosphere. And so we'll be bouncing ideas off each other, which is really, really helpful and really, really supportive as well. And so all the staff at the school are all very aware of what speech and language therapists do and what we're there for. I have had that sort of miscommunication with parents, and I think, I'm not sure if you guys have ever had this, but there have been parents who have had an idea of what speech and language therapy is, and that's become miscommunicated into maybe the wrong expectation for what's going to be happening with their child. So saying, we should be focusing on their language use, when actually, if we can't work on attention, then there's no, they're not going to be able to work on that without working on attention first, and that can be difficult.
Right, it sounds really collaborative though, in that you've got that support around you, and thank you very much. We're going to move to our next topic now, so thank you for all your answers on that previous topic. The next topic we're going to talk about is mental health and wellbeing. We've been talking about the challenges as working as speech and language therapists, and thinking about our mental health as speech and language therapists and what we do to look after ourselves. How do you stay positive, and how do you ensure that you can find a work-life balance as such in your respective fields? And have you got any advice for any students that are concerned about this area, specifically about work-life balance? I know it's a term that's used quite sort of thrown around quite a lot, and it can be difficult actually to find that. And I think in the surveys that we did, quite a few students just highlighted that as an area of concern for when they qualify. So if you wouldn't mind sharing how's things gone, Anna, if I go with you first, if that's okay.
Yeah. So I think my first piece of advice, which I stick to, is do not check your work emails outside of work hours. I know it's tempting when you've got phones, but honestly, just don't do it. There's no expectation that you need to. Nobody wants you to, and it will just potentially play havoc with your work-life balance and mental health. You need to have that cut-off between when you finish the day, that you are not going back on emails. So please, if you just take away one thing from what I said, don't check your work emails. But I think more broadly, there are lots of things we can do to protect that good work-life balance relationship. And I think one of them is to just be very conscious about what your expectations are. I think, in any area of service that you work in, obviously I work for the NHS, you're never going to be able to deliver exactly the type of therapy that you want to all the time. There just aren't the resources. And you have to get used to seeing and acknowledging what is good enough. I think a lot of speech and language therapists are people pleasers. Some of us might be perfectionists as well, and it can be quite hard sometimes to be content with good enough and not perfect, and realising that you're not going to be able to make everybody happy all the time. So if you can come to peace with that early, that's really helpful. A colleague of mine was actually sharing recently some ideas about the difference between reflection being a kind of, a useful process. So when you've finished a session or you've finished a block of work, thinking and reflecting on how it can be better, and the less positive rumination, where you're kind of going over and over the mistakes that you've made in your mind, and you'll get sort of trapped into a kind of negative thought cycle about it. So I think being able to recognise the difference between those two things, and if it starts to slide into rumination, to take steps to be like, nope, this is not helpful, this is not serving anybody, and just drawing a line under it and moving on. And then I think my final piece of advice for that is just to use your colleagues, because they'll be wonderful, and they'll have experienced similar things, and they can help you. So just speak out if you're struggling with those things.
Thank you, Anna. And Sam, sort of we're going from colleagues there, it just made me come straight to you, because I know that you've got that vast amount of speech and language therapy colleagues.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, I don't know if this is a generic problem or just a problem that I have, but if I'm feeling stressed or overwhelmed, I will very often just kind of push it down, or I won't talk about it. And I think working with the team that I have over the past year, I've become a lot better at saying, if I am stressed or overwhelmed, actually saying, guys, this is too much. Can anybody help me? And it's a wonderful team. So we're always, if they've got too much, we can spread that workload a bit, because it's generally kind of comes in peaks and troughs in terms of busyness. Couldn't agree more with the work emails. I think it should be illegal to go on them after you've finished. And additionally, I think, I know quite often in the NHS, but I've also felt an expectation to stay past the end of the shift
Yes.
if I've got work to catch up on. And I have done that. Whereas actually, again, I've kind of internalized that. I've thought, well, that's just part of the job. We all have to do that. But actually, I've spoken to my supervisor and found a way to rearrange sort of the amounts of work that I've been doing in the day in order to make time to finish sort of, it's when the reports are stacking up or the planning is going out of control. So I've been a lot more strict to leave at the end of the day, not stay late, because I think that's important.
Because I guess thank you for sharing, and I guess that can feel those, even if it's 5-10 minutes after, it can always feel like an extra hour, and then then you get stuck the next day coming in because of traffic, and then someone makes a comment that you're late, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, don't make me count this up. Which I might be speaking from experience, but no, thank you very much for sharing, Colin. Is there anything you wanted to say on that matter? Yeah,
listening to both of you mentioned some of those things there. It's like listening to my own internal monologue. Can't do everything perfectly. Don't stay late. I think staying late is one of the things that almost all new Band 5s fall into. Yeah. And I'm guilty of it. And generally much better now. Really, 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 really try not to do it, because I suppose the thought is, okay, if I stay late, I can see this extra patient, and there's always going to be more. It's not like speech therapy will be done one day, and we're not aiming for a finish line where all the work is done, and it's just the work will expand. There will always be work there, and the thing is, we know there's a huge rate of burnout across the NHS, in healthcare in general. So staying late and putting it on yourself that if I don't see this person, that won't happen. Putting that level of burden and that pressure on yourself isn't going to do anyone any good, and it's just going to increase the chance of you burning out. And then, therefore, we all get into this profession to help people, right? Generally, it's definitely not the pay. If you're putting that burden on yourself, and you can't achieve that, then you're just going to feel rubbish. Yeah. So trying to maximize how long you can stay doing your job, by not burning out and doing it effectively. What Alice said as well about speech therapists, often being perfectionists, and I think there are certain types of people who get into this job, and like I said, people pleasers too. I think, like I was saying earlier about being adaptable with your assessments, being adaptable with your therapy, knowing that ideally we'd be giving this patient twice a day swallow therapy, using these different devices, using this different type of therapy approach, and we don't have that where we are. We have to do the best what we can with what we've got, and it can chip away at you, as Sam said, speaking about it with your colleagues, because we'll all be feeling the same thing. I think something else to mention as well is that it's like a specific emotional toil of the job as well. So I imagine working with pediatrics, you're encountering people who have really had a tough deal in life a lot of the time, or people who are affected by deprivation, or tough things can happen to people. And when children or young people are involved, that can be so heartbreaking as well. In the medical setting, obviously, you're often dealing with people at really, really horrible parts of their lives. And that can have an emotional toil, for sure. If you're, seeing people with progressive neurological conditions, seeing people having patients. I still remember the first patient of mine who died, building up a relationship with a patient and then getting to know them well, and then they pass away, or it can build up. And if it doesn't get to you a bit, you should be worried. It's going to get to you a bit, how you deal with it. Yeah. Knowing how to talk about it, how to get that balance, whether that be completely switching off and speaking to friends, or even just meeting some friends outside work who are speech therapists as well and having a bit of a whinge. Whatever you can do that helps. People will respond differently to that.
I just want to add quickly, when you talk about burnout, you will be at more benefit for the service and your service users the longer you can stay in your job role. Yeah. If you burn out within a year because you push yourself too hard,
you're not doing anybody any favours.
One less SLT.
Yeah, were you better off doing an extra hour every week and burning out in a year, or doing for 40 years and sticking to your hours? Come on.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing as well. It's great to hear. And I think for the listeners of this podcast, it's amazing to hear from yourselves about these issues that are, the questions on the students' minds, and from established speech and language therapists that actually they're still things that are being thought about, but actually they're things that, as you said, you're sort of seeing it on the horizon, and rather than waiting to get there, you're sort of starting to think about what can I do before I get there, so that if it is an issue with overworking, or if there is something that's coming up quite regularly. Something that came up was about working effectively. And I guess that can come into the conversation about using your time as best as possible, which I know will look different for all of the different settings around this table. Are there any skills that newly qualified professionals could how could they upskill their effectiveness? And I suppose it's that tightrope between giving this person sat in front of me the exact time that they deserve and that they need, but also making sure that I'm managing sort of a caseload. If that's not too big of a question, is there any way that newly qualified professionals can work effectively?
In terms of interaction with clients or with time management?
I think time management
more. Time management, yeah.
I'd love to know the answer to this.
There might not be an answer, but are there any skills that you use in your day-to-day basis that you think that really helps my efficiency, and that helps me be able to complete the amount of work that I'm happy with, and the service is happy with? Well,
it sounds really simple, but I find it really effective. It's just to-do lists.
Yeah.
Like having, I have multiple to-do lists, but they're all kind of in one document. And I have the things I have to do today, the things I have to do soon, and the things I have to do in the long term. So I think one thing that's challenging about our job is the kind of short-term responding versus longer-term planning or longer-term tasks. And it can be easy to get sort of swept up in just what I need to do straight away. But I think if I just make sure that anything I need to do goes on this one document, which is my to-do lists, and I decide doesn't need to be done today, doesn't need to be done within the next week, or actually is this something I can come back to when I have a quieter week. So I'm a big fan of checklists and to-do lists.
Go on, Sam, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, something similar to that. Keeping a record, even if it's just one Word document, of all the things that you need to all the things related to your kind of development in your first couple of years and onward, to be honest. So, for example, in your first year, you'll be looking at things like your RCSLT, newly qualified competencies, keeping a record of all that stuff, keeping on top of that admin, making sure you give yourself that time in the week. And to be fair, your supervisors should be doing that anyway, to make sure you have that you're allocating that time to keep on top of things like dysphagia competencies, any CPD that you're doing. You don't need to immediately upload everything to the correct platform, like the RCSLT one, for example, or just have it somewhere so that you can, rather than trying to trawl back through, when did I do that fees with that patient to add to my fees competencies list, or when did I do that session with a translator to add to my newly qualified competencies. Just keep one document and bung everything in there, and then put it where it needs to be afterwards. It's like a lot of things in life, a little bit, just keeping on top of something a little bit regularly will be better than trying to, oh no, I've been audited by the HCPC and I need to go back through everything for the last year. Mm-hmm. It sounds simple, and it sounds a little bit boring, but it's really effective, I'm afraid.
And if I could just add, I think something I find really helpful where possible is to plan ahead. Ideally, when I'm at my best, I've got a revolving plan of all the sessions that are upcoming, and as they're completed, then I've got the next one kind of ready to go. And a colleague has this matrix where it's got 4 sections. It's got urgency and importance, and every single task has to be slotted into one of these 4. So is it urgent? Yes. Is it important? No. And so that really helps. It really helps you rank sort of the order in which you try and achieve the things on your to-do list.
Thank you. I know that's a hard question to spring on all 3 of you, and I think that's some amazing answers, so I appreciate it. I'm going to go with one more question, and this question is a bit of a situational, so I want you to imagine yourselves walking in to work on that first day as a newly qualified therapist. Knowing what you know now, what would you go and tell that therapist walking in?
Don't stay late.
Don't stay late. Turn off your work emails.
Yeah. I think there is a way, isn't there? You can like put those so they don't come up on your phone, because I suppose that's the difficult thing. Thinking actually logistically is like throughout the day running around or doing what you're doing, it's better to be able to see something quickly. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't think that, but
so you can have it. You can open Outlook on your browser on your phone, and then once you've closed that browser, it's not.
You don't get like a push notification.
Or just have them on your work phone, because you'll probably get given a work phone, and just don't have them on your personal mobile. Then at 5 p.m, 5:15, whenever, turn that phone off. Yeah, I think if I was gonna go back to myself on my first day of work, I think I would probably say just try and enjoy the next few months as much as you can.
Yeah.
Like, you will be spinning a lot of plates, and sometimes it can, feel a bit like learning to swim in open choppy waters when there's sharks circling around you. But actually to enjoy it, because when you're a newly qualified therapist in your first job, it's a really great time to try out lots of different things and ask if you can observe other parts of the service. And, normally supervisors should sort of facilitate that and try out different therapy techniques and really just try and find out what your passion is and what you love in speech and language therapy. So I think, enjoy it, I would say to her.
That's a great advice. Thank you, Anna. And Quillon, anything else to add?
Part of that, it would fall under that, is a bit like we were talking about earlier. Just remember, you can't do everything. And it's not your fault if you can't do every single task that needs to be done, because nobody can. And if you do that, I think it'll follow on that you'll enjoy it more. Because, if you come in with these, it's good to have the training and the gold standard intervention, absolutely. But if you go in expecting to be able to do everything 100% perfectly, then you're on a hide into nothing. Enjoy trying new things, learning new things, and remember, part of your job is to get better. No one's expecting you to be able to do everything when you first arrive. You will be learning, as Anna said earlier on, all through your career. It's just different. It's just learning different things at different points.
That's great advice. Thank you. Sam, anything to add to that?
I think they both summed it up beautifully. I guess I'd say in 3 days' time, you're going to have a 1-to-1. Do not mention Liverpool. It's a trap. It's a trick. Don't do it.
Oh, good advice. So I guess from myself and the others on this project, it's just to say thank you so much for taking time out of what I can tell to be your busy schedules from hearing what you've spoken about for the last short while, and really appreciate your input for this podcast and to help students that are currently going through sort of thoughts and feelings about how their career is going to look. Please know that this is going to be really helpful for them. So I appreciate your time, and I'm sure they do too. And also good luck to all the students listening over the next few months.
Yes, good luck.
So thank you very much.
It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
It will.
Sam, Quillen and Anna, thank you so much, and all the best.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Mark.
Thank you very much.